The morning was quiet and soft, with sunlight spilling gently across the streets. People hurried by with their routines, each lost in their own worlds. She stepped out of her apartment building, her coffee in hand, enjoying the small moment of calm before the day fully began. The air was fresh, carrying the faint scent of bakery bread from a shop nearby. The city felt alive, yet peaceful. She walked slowly, not in a rush, noticing the details others often missed. A flower pot by a shop window, a bird singing high in a tree, a child waving at someone across the street. Life's small moments had a way of catching her attention, and she liked it that way. It made the world feel connected, personal, it's meaningful. He was sitting on a bench across the street, head down, eyes focused on his hands. Something about him seemed different from the others around. There was a stillness, almost like he was carrying a weight that made him pause from the rush of the world. She noticed him almost instinctively, curiosity sparking inside her. She didn't know why she paid attention to strangers usually, but something about him pulled her gaze. Perhaps it was the quiet sadness in his posture, the careful way he avoided looking at anyone directly. She moved closer, deciding to sit on the bench next to him. It felt like a small decision, but one that would change the course of the day, unknowingly shaping both their lives. She offered a polite smile, a small gesture of acknowledgement that carried warmth without pressure. He glanced at her briefly, then quickly looked down again. There was a hesitancy in him, a pause as if he wasn't sure how to respond to someone noticing him at all. She started talking softly about trivial things. It's the kind of words people usually use to fill silence. "The sun feels nice this morning, doesn't it?" she said. She didn't expect a response, just wanted to make the quiet less heavy. But he looked up for a moment, a shadow of a smile crossing his face before he quickly looked down again. She noticed it, but didn't press. Some smiles were fragile, and they needed to bloom in their own time. Time passed slowly. People walked by, cars passed. A dog ran along the sidewalk, barking at nothing in particular. She talked about little things, her words like threads in the air, trying to weave connection without forcing it. He listened, sometimes answering with a single word, sometimes with a small sentence that hinted at more beneath the surface. His eyes occasionally met hers, curious but cautious, like someone trying to measure trust in a glance. She found herself enjoying the presence of this quiet stranger. There was no need to share personal stories yet, no pressure for revelations. The simplicity of shared space, of someone else noticing and not judging, was enough. And she could tell it mattered to him too. Even if he wouldn't say it out loud, he fiddled with something in his pocket, a small object that seemed to carry importance, though she didn't ask about it. She didn't need to. The way he handled it, the small pauses in his movements, told her more than words ever could. People carried their secrets in gestures, in silences, in things too small to name. Minutes became an hour without either of them noticing. Conversations drifted, sometimes stopping completely, leaving only the sound of distant traffic and rustling leaves. She observed him quietly, wondering what thoughts ran through his mind. There was depth there, layers she couldn't reach yet. But she sensed a story waiting to unfold. A soft laugh escaped him at something she said. Almost a whisper, fragile but genuine. Her own laughter followed naturally, light and free, breaking the tension of the quiet that had surrounded them. It was the kind of sound that didn't demand attention but invited connection. The world seemed to shift slightly around them. Ordinary moments gaining significance simply because someone else noticed them. She realized she didn't know anything about him, where he came from, what he did, or what his days were like. And yet, in this brief encounter, there was a sense of understanding. A recognition that sometimes people needed acknowledgement more than explanations. The day moved on, the sun climbing higher. But they stayed there, two lives intersecting in a fleeting but meaningful way. When it was finally time to leave, she stood up, feeling a strange reluctance to break the spell of the moment. He watched her eyes following her movement, a hint of something unspoken lingering in the air. She offered one last small smile and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the connection that had formed without words needing to define it. As she walked away, she glanced back once. He was still sitting there, hands folded, looking slightly more at ease than before. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or if they would meet again, but she carried a quiet certainty that even small gestures, even brief encounters, had the power to change a life in ways that weren't immediately visible. The rest of the day passed, routine unfolding as usual. But the memory of that bench, that moment, lingered. She couldn't stop thinking about him, wondering about the thoughts behind his careful eyes, the story he wasn't telling. There was an urge inside her, gentle but persistent, to reach out, to keep the thread of connection alive even if she didn't yet know how. Meanwhile, he sat there long after she had gone, replaying the moments in his mind. The presence of someone noticing him without judgment, without prying, had left a mark. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the weight of his hidden burden. He didn't understand it fully yet, but it stirred something inside him, a fragile hope, a sense that maybe he wasn't as invisible as he had always thought, even though neither of them knew it at the time. That morning marked the beginning of something significant. A simple meeting, a quiet conversation, and a shared space had set the stage for a story that would slowly unfold, revealing truths, changing perspectives, and altering lives in ways neither could have imagined. And all of it began with a small smile, a shared moment, and the willingness to simply be present for someone else. Days passed after their first meeting, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet man on the bench. Something about his presence lingered in her mind, a subtle pull that made her pay more attention to small details around her, as if she were waiting for the world to lead her back to him. Life moved on as usual, but there was a certain anticipation in her every step, a curiosity that quietly demanded exploration. She returned to the same park, hoping, without admitting it to herself, that he might be there again. And there he was, sitting in the same spot, hands folded, eyes focused on the ground. He looked up briefly as she approached, a faint recognition flickering across his face, quickly replaced by his usual caution. The brief glance, however, told her that he remembered her too. She greeted him softly, keeping her tone light and casual. "It's nice to see you again," she said. He nodded, a tiny smile forming before he looked down once more. The smile was subtle, but to her, it was enough. It showed that perhaps her presence, though small and unassuming, mattered in a way he hadn't expected. They began talking about ordinary things, whether the little happenings of the city, the birds that seemed to sing just for them that morning. But over time, their conversations became more personal. She spoke of her day-to-day experiences, sharing stories that were simple but sincere. He listened, sometimes offering a few words in return, but each word seemed measured and thoughtful, revealing glimpses of his personality without exposing too much. She noticed the small things, the way his eyes would flicker with emotion when she mentioned something joyful, or the faint tension in his shoulders when he spoke of moments from his past. She didn't push him, understanding that trust could not be rushed. Instead, she created space, allowing him to share when he felt ready, letting her presence be a quiet reassurance. During one of their conversations, she mentioned a local community event, a small charity fair with music and handmade crafts. She casually invited him, careful not to pressure him. Surprisingly, he agreed, albeit hesitantly. There was a quiet excitement in him that surprised even himself, a willingness to step outside his comfort zone because of her gentle encouragement. He hadn't realized how much he had needed a reason to engage with the world again. Over the next few weeks, their meetings became routine, though never forced. Each encounter brought small changes, subtle shifts in expression, a more relaxed posture, a little more laughter shared between them. She never demanded explanations or confessions. She simply noticed him, appreciated him, and treated him with the kind of kindness that doesn't expect anything in return. There were moments when he seemed distant, lost in thought, and she respected those pauses. Sometimes she would simply sit silently beside him, offering companionship without words. Those quiet moments were as important as the conversations. She realized because they allowed him to feel seen without pressure, to exist without judgment. She started observing patterns in his behavior, the careful way he moved, the objects he carried, the subtle hesitations in his speech. Her attention wasn't intrusive. It was simply an awareness born of genuine care. She noticed when he smiled slightly at a familiar tune from a street musician or when he lingered over a flower in the park. Those little reactions told her more than words ever could. He, in turn, began to rely on her presence in small, unnoticed ways. He found himself looking forward to her arrival, feeling a sense of calm when she was near. Her empathy, so quiet and consistent, gave him a space to exist without the weight of his own expectations. He didn't have to explain, apologize, or hide. She simply allowed him to be. One afternoon, as they sat together on the bench, she shared a story about helping a neighbor fix a broken fence. She laughed at the clumsiness of the task, the way the hammer slipped from her hand. And he found himself smiling genuinely, the sound surprising even him. For the first time in a long while, he felt the lightness of shared human experience, the warmth of connection that didn't demand anything from him. The seasons began to shift subtly. Leaves turning golden on the trees, the air crisp with approaching autumn. Their meetings continued, marked by small rituals, a wave from across the park, shared coffee, a comment about the changing weather. Each interaction, though simple, strengthened the bond forming between them. Like threads weaving a fabric of trust, she started bringing small tokens of kindness, always thoughtful but unobtrusive. A warm scarf left on the bench for him one chilly morning, a pastry from her favorite bakery, a gentle reminder to take care of himself. Each gesture was quiet, yet it carried weight, showing that she noticed him, valued him, and cared without needing acknowledgement. He began to share small things in return: a favorite book, a story from his past, a memory of something that made him laugh. He was careful, selective, but gradually opening doors he had long kept closed. Each revelation was a fragile gift, and she received it with warmth, never judgment, never hurry. The trust that had begun with a single glance on a bench now grew with patience and quiet attention. There were challenges, of course. Some days he would retreat into silence, the burden of his hidden struggles pressing on him. She noticed, respected, and waited. She didn't force conversation, understanding that support often meant simply being present. Her patience became a silent anchor, grounding him in moments when he felt adrift. Their connection became a lifeline in small, incremental ways. She didn't know the full weight of his secret yet, but her influence was already visible. The corners of his world seemed brighter, the heaviness slightly lessened, the possibility of hope flickering in moments he didn't fully recognize. Her consistent kindness, her ability to see him without pressure or expectation, was gradually changing him in ways neither of them could yet articulate. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting warm light across the park, they sat together in comfortable silence. He watched the sky, noticing the colors he hadn't truly seen in years. She spoke softly about the changing seasons, the beauty in everyday moments. And he found himself listening, absorbing, appreciating. It was a quiet transformation, subtle and profound. By the end of part 2, the bond between them had grown into something more than acquaintance. She had become a quiet presence in his life, someone whose existence carried meaning, even without full knowledge of his inner world. He had begun to let her in, cautiously, feeling the edges of his burden lighten. And though the secret remained unspoken, her influence was unmistakable, shaping him through patience, empathy, and genuine human connection. The days grew shorter, and the soft warmth of the sun began to fade into longer evenings. Their routine continued in quiet harmony, the park bench and shared moments becoming familiar and comforting. But beneath the surface, a weight lingered. The secret he carried pressing on him in ways even he sometimes couldn't fully understand. It was a rainy afternoon when the truth began to surface. She arrived at the park, umbrella in hand, expecting to find him waiting as usual. Instead, she found the bench empty and a note tucked under a small rock. Her curiosity piqued. She picked it up and read the words carefully. It was short, written with a hand that trembled slightly as if the act of writing had been difficult. He explained in fragments that there were parts of his life he had hidden, struggles he could not easily share, and fears he carried that made connection difficult. She sat on the wet bench, reading the note again, feeling the weight of his words. She understood immediately that this was a plea for understanding, a quiet reach for connection without the pressure of face-to-face confrontation. She folded the note gently and held it for a moment, absorbing the depth of vulnerability it contained. The next day, she returned to the park, unsure if he would come. Her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and concern. When he appeared dripping from the rain, she noticed the tightness in his movements, the way his eyes darted nervously. She didn't speak at first, simply offering a quiet smile, a gesture of recognition and support. No judgment, no questions, just acknowledgement. He sat down slowly, still wary, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he began, cautiously at first, revealing pieces of his secret. He spoke of past mistakes, of challenges he had faced alone, of fears that had isolated him from the world. His voice was quiet, tinged with shame and hesitation, yet there was relief in the act of sharing. Each word seemed to lift a fraction of the burden he had carried for so long. She listened with full attention, never interrupting, never offering solutions before he asked. Her presence alone created a space where honesty could exist without the sting of judgment. When he faltered, unsure how much to reveal, she simply nodded and smiled gently, encouraging him to continue in his own time. As the story unfolded, she realized the enormity of the pain and fear he had lived with silently. It was more than she had imagined, a tapestry of struggles woven into his daily existence. And yet, despite the heaviness, there was resilience, a quiet strength that had allowed him to survive each day without crumbling completely. She shared small responses, simple but meaningful. A hand lightly resting on his arm, a nod of understanding, words of reassurance like, "I hear you," or "It's okay to feel this way." Each gesture was carefully measured, offering safety rather than intrusion, a reminder that he wasn't alone. Over time, he began to trust her more fully. He revealed details of experiences he had hidden from everyone else, moments of failure and fear, and even small joys he had rarely acknowledged. Her reactions were consistent, empathetic, and patient, never rushing him, never demanding more than he was ready to give. The trust that had grown slowly in part two now deepened, forming a bond forged through vulnerability and care. There were moments of intense emotion tears that came suddenly. Laughter that broke through the sadness, silence that spoke volumes. She learned to read the subtle cues, understanding when to speak and when to remain still, offering support without words. The rhythm of their interactions became a dance of trust, patience, and empathy. He began to reflect on his past differently, seeing how her presence had already influenced him. The fear that had dominated his life started to feel less absolute, replaced with the possibility of hope and change. Her simple acts of kindness, listening, noticing, being present were slowly reshaping the way he viewed himself and the world around him. One afternoon, he shared a particularly painful memory, a moment that had haunted him for years. She held his gaze gently, allowing him to release the emotion without fear of judgment. He admitted how long he had hidden it, how isolated it had made him feel, and how uncertain he was about allowing anyone to see this part of him. She didn't try to fix it, didn't offer cliches or empty reassurance. She simply sat beside him, a quiet anchor in the storm, letting him know that his story was heard and valued. This moment marked a turning point. The secret that had shaped so much of his life was no longer a solitary weight. Sharing it, even partially, with someone who truly listened, began to shift its power over him. He started to understand that vulnerability could coexist with strength, and that he didn't have to face everything alone. The days that followed were a delicate balance of normalcy and revelation. He still had his moments of retreat, times when the old fears and habits resurfaced. But she was there consistently, her presence a gentle, steady force. She never pushed him to reveal more than he was ready to, never treated him differently because of what he had shared. She simply existed as a reminder that connection, understanding, and patience could coexist with his struggles. Through these interactions, she began to see him not just as someone with a secret, but as a whole person, a complex mix of courage, fragility, humor, and resilience. And he began to see her not just as a passerby, but as a person who genuinely cared, whose quiet actions and steady presence had become a source of light in his life. The secret, while still partially hidden, no longer felt insurmountable. Its power over him was lessening with each shared moment, each patient conversation, each acknowledgement of his humanity. He started to take small steps he had avoided for years, reaching out to old friends, participating in small events, allowing himself minor joys without guilt or fear. One evening, as the sun set behind the city buildings, casting long shadows across the park, they sat together silently. He looked at her and without words conveyed a sense of gratitude and trust that he hadn't expressed before. It was a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the journey they had begun together. She smiled softly, knowing that while the secret remained partially veiled, the bond they had forged was strong enough to carry them forward by the end of Part 3. The man's secret was no longer a silent prison, but a shared reality that had begun to lose its oppressive hold. The woman's influence, though quiet and consistent, had already begun to change him in ways he hadn't anticipated. And while challenges remained, hope had taken root, nurtured by patience, empathy, and the courage to be vulnerable. Their story, once a simple meeting on a park bench, was now evolving into a deeper connection, one that would continue to shape their lives in profound and unforeseen ways after the secret was shared. Life did not suddenly become easy for him. There were no dramatic changes overnight, no clear line that separated the past from the present. But something inside him had shifted. It was small at first, almost unnoticeable, like the quiet warmth that stays after the sun disappears. Yet it was real, and it began to guide him in ways he hadn't expected. Their meetings continued, but they felt different now. There was more openness between them, more honesty in the air. He spoke a little more freely, not just about his struggles, but also about simple things he liked and missed. She listened the same way she always had, with patience and care, never making him feel like he was being examined or judged. Her calm presence reminded him that he didn't need to hide anymore, at least not with her. He started noticing changes in himself during the days they didn't meet. He walked with his head a little higher. He paid attention to the world around him again. Small sounds, like laughter from a nearby cafe or the rustle of leaves underfoot, no longer felt distant. They reminded him that life was still happening and that he was allowed to be part of it. One morning, he surprised himself by making a decision he would have avoided before. He attended a small local workshop that focused on learning new skills. It wasn't something dramatic, but for him it felt huge. Sitting in a room with others, listening, participating, and not retreating into silence, took courage. As he sat there, he realized that her belief in him had quietly become part of his own belief in himself. When he told her about it later, she smiled with genuine pride. She didn't exaggerate or make it sound bigger than it was. She simply acknowledged the effort and the courage it took. That simple reaction meant more to him than praise ever could. It made him feel seen in the right way, not for his pain, but for his progress. There were setbacks too. Some days, old fears returned without warning. Doubt crept in, whispering that he was pretending, that change was temporary. On those days, he withdrew a little, his words fewer, his posture closed. She noticed, of course, she always did. But instead of pushing him to talk, she stayed steady, offering quiet support through her presence. Sometimes that meant sitting in silence. Other times it meant talking about ordinary things until the heaviness slowly loosened its grip. Her kindness was never loud. She didn't give speeches or force motivation. She showed up. She remembered small details. She asked how he was feeling without demanding answers. Through her actions, she showed him that growth didn't have to be perfect to be real. As weeks passed, he began facing parts of his life he had long avoided. He reconnected with people he had distanced himself from, starting with simple messages and short conversations. Each step felt risky, but it also felt necessary. He reminded himself of the calm strength he felt when sitting beside her, and that memory helped him push forward. She noticed his efforts even when he didn't talk about them. She saw the way his eyes carried more light, how his laughter came more easily. She never claimed credit for his change, and he never felt like he owed her anything. Their connection was built on respect, not dependence. That made it stronger. One afternoon, they walked through the park instead of sitting on the bench. It was a small change, but meaningful. Walking side by side felt symbolic, like moving forward together rather than staying still. He talked about future ideas he had been too afraid to consider before. Nothing was set in stone. But the fact that he could imagine possibilities at all felt like progress. She encouraged him gently, reminding him that he didn't have to rush or prove anything. Change, she believed, was allowed to be slow. Hearing that lifted a quiet pressure from his chest. For so long, he had felt behind in life, as if he had missed his chance. Now he began to see that there was no single timeline he had to follow. There was a moment, one evening, when he caught himself laughing freely, without hesitation or fear. The sound surprised him. He paused, realizing how long it had been since he felt that light. She noticed the pause and smiled, understanding without needing an explanation. That moment stayed with him long after they parted ways that night. He also began helping others in small ways. Nothing grand, just simple acts of kindness. Holding a door, listening to someone who needed to talk, offering support where he could. These actions reminded him of the way she had helped him, not by fixing him, but by believing in his ability to grow. At times, he wondered how much she truly knew about the impact she was having on his life. She had entered it without knowing his secret, without knowing how broken he felt inside. And yet, through her patience and quiet care, she had changed the way he saw himself. He realized that sometimes the most powerful changes came from people who didn't try to change anything at all. As the season shifted again, bringing cooler air and longer nights, he felt more grounded than he had in years. The weight of his secret was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He had learned that facing life didn't mean facing it alone. He had learned that being seen, even by just one person, could make a difference. Their connection remained steady, built on trust, respect, and shared growth. There was no dramatic declaration, no clear ending to the struggle. But there was progress, real and lasting. And as he looked ahead, he no longer felt trapped by his past. He felt ready, not for perfection, but for possibility. By the end of this part of his journey, it was clear that he was no longer the same person who once sat on the bench feeling invisible. He was still learning, still healing, but he was moving forward. And even though she never knew his secret at the beginning, her presence had quietly changed the direction of his life in ways that could never be undone. Life did not suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. That was the biggest change. He woke up each morning no longer feeling the same heavy fear pressing on his chest. Some days were still difficult, but they no longer felt endless. He had learned how to face them, step by step, without running or hiding. Their meetings continued, though they were no longer limited to the park bench where everything had begun. Sometimes they walked through busy streets. Sometimes they sat quietly with warm drinks, watching people pass by. The world felt larger now, and he felt like he belonged in it again. She never pushed him to move faster than he was ready for. She simply walked beside him, letting him choose the pace. One evening, as the city lights came on, he felt ready to speak more clearly than he ever had before. He talked about how his life used to feel like a locked room, dark and airless. He explained how every day felt the same, heavy and lonely. He told her that before she entered his life, he had accepted that feeling as normal. He had believed that some people were simply meant to live quietly in the shadows. She listened, her expression calm and open. She didn't interrupt. When he paused, she encouraged him with her eyes, letting him know she was there, fully present. That simple attention gave him the courage to continue. He told her how her kindness had slowly changed things, even before she knew anything about his past. The way she spoke to him like he mattered, the way she noticed small details others ignored, the way she never treated him like he was broken or needed fixing. He admitted that at first, he didn't understand why she cared at all. She was quiet for a moment after he finished. Then she spoke softly, saying she never set out to change his life. She just believed that everyone deserved to be seen and treated with care. Her words were simple, but they stayed with him. They confirmed what he had come to realize on his own, that real change often comes from small, genuine moments, not grand actions. As time passed, he continued rebuilding parts of his life he once thought were lost. He took on more responsibility at work, trusted himself to handle challenges, and allowed himself to make plans for the future. Not every plan worked out, but he no longer saw setbacks as proof of failure. He saw them as part of learning. He also became more open with others. He didn't share his full story with everyone, but he no longer hid behind silence. People noticed the difference. They commented on how present he seemed, how his voice carried more confidence. Each observation reminded him how far he had come. She remained a steady presence, never asking for credit. Sometimes she wasn't even aware of how deeply she had influenced his growth. To her, their connection felt natural, something that fit easily into her life. To him, it was the turning point he never expected. One afternoon, they returned to the park where they first met. The bench was still there, worn but familiar. They sat for a while, watching the world move around them. He remembered the person he had been on that first day, sitting alone, convinced that no one noticed him. The contrast felt overwhelming. He told her how that first conversation had stayed with him, how her simple words had broken through walls he had spent years building. He admitted that without realizing it, she had given him permission to hope again. She smiled, touched but humble. She reminded him that he was the one who chose to change, the one who faced his fears and kept moving forward. She believed people carried their own strength, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Sometimes they just needed someone else to reflect it back to them. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the ground, he felt a deep sense of peace. Not because everything was solved, but because he no longer felt alone in the world. He understood that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about learning how to live with it without letting it control the future. Their relationship continued, shaped by mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't built on secrets anymore, but on honesty and shared growth. There was no dramatic ending, no final moment that wrapped everything up perfectly. Instead, there was continuity, life moving forward, grounded in connection. He started giving back in his own quiet way. He listened more. He noticed people who felt invisible, just as he once had. When he offered kindness, he did so without expectation, remembering how powerful it had been when someone did the same for him. She sometimes wondered how much that first meeting had meant to him. She never imagined it had changed the direction of his life. To her, it was just a moment of human connection, something she believed in deeply. She didn't need to know the full impact to keep being who she was. As months turned into a new season, he stood more firmly in his life. He faced challenges with steadier hands and a clearer mind. The secret that once defined him was now just one part of his story, no longer the whole of it. Looking back, he realized that she had changed his life long before he understood why. She hadn't known his secret when she first sat beside him. She hadn't known how close he was to giving up on himself. Yet her presence, her patience, and her quiet belief had reached him in ways nothing else ever had. And so the story didn't end with a dramatic moment, but with something far more powerful, two people continuing forward, changed by a simple choice to connect. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can become the beginning of a completely new life. Life kept moving, as it always does, but it moved differently for him now. There was a steadiness in his days that had not been there before. He no longer measured time by how heavy it felt. Instead, he noticed moments. Mornings felt quieter in a good way. Evenings felt less empty. There was space inside him now, space where fear used to live. He and she still met often, but their connection no longer needed constant words to survive. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they shared silence that felt full, not awkward. They understood each other without explanations. That understanding had grown naturally, shaped by patience and honesty. One day he realized something important. He no longer waited for her presence to feel strong. Her influence had become part of him. The confidence he once borrowed from her belief had slowly turned into his own. That realization did not distance him from her. Instead, it made their connection healthier, rooted in choice rather than need. He began setting small goals for himself. Nothing overwhelming, just steps that felt possible. He tried new routines, took responsibility for things he once avoided, and trusted his ability to handle discomfort. When things didn't go as planned, he didn't collapse under the weight of it. He adjusted and moved forward. She noticed the change even before he spoke about it. She saw it in the way he carried himself, in the calm way he handled problems, in the way he spoke about the future. There was pride in her eyes, but not the kind that claimed ownership. It was the pride of someone witnessing growth they always believed was possible. They talked one evening about how people cross paths for reasons that are not always clear at first. He admitted that if she had known his secret from the beginning, she might have treated him differently, even without meaning to. But she met him before the labels, before the explanations. That, he believed, made all the difference. She reflected on that quietly. She said she was glad she met him as a person first, not as a story or a problem. Everyone carried something unseen, she believed. Kindness should not depend on knowing the details. As time passed, life brought its usual mix of challenges and joys. There were stressful days, unexpected disappointments, and moments of doubt. But there were also victories, both big and small. He learned that growth was not about never struggling again. It was about responding differently when struggle arrived. He faced a moment that once would have broken him. An unexpected setback tested his confidence and stirred old fears. For a brief time, he felt the familiar urge to withdraw. But this time, he paused. He remembered how far he had come. He reached out instead of retreating. She listened, as she always had. Not with panic or urgency, but with steady presence. She reminded him of his progress without dismissing his feelings. That balance helped him regain his footing. It proved to him that he had truly changed. Later, he handled the situation on his own, making decisions with clarity and self-respect. When it was over, he felt something new. Pride, not loud or dramatic, but solid and earned. Their bond continued to evolve. It was no longer defined by the past or by what had been healed. It existed in the present, shaped by mutual trust. They supported each other as equals, sharing laughter, worries, and everyday moments. He became more aware of people around him. He noticed who seemed overlooked, who spoke quietly, who carried sadness behind polite smiles. He didn't always know what to say, but he learned that showing up mattered. A simple conversation, a kind word, a moment of attention. He offered what he once needed most. She watched this part of him with quiet admiration. The man who once felt invisible now had the ability to see others deeply. His past pain had not disappeared, but it had transformed into empathy. That, she believed, was a rare and powerful thing. One afternoon, while walking through familiar streets, he stopped and looked around. The city felt the same, but he was not. He felt grounded, capable, and present. He understood that the life he was living now had grown from one small moment of connection. He never forgot that she didn't know his secret when she changed his life. She changed it simply by being human, by choosing kindness without conditions. That truth stayed with him and shaped how he moved through the world as the years continued. Their paths remained connected, though not tightly bound. They supported each other's growth, respecting independence as much as closeness. Their story was not about rescue or dependence. It was about impact. Looking back, he saw his journey clearly. A man weighed down by silence. A stranger who noticed him. A connection that grew slowly, honestly, and a life that shifted, not through force, but through care. The secret that once defined him had become a chapter, not the whole story. He carried it with understanding instead of shame. He no longer feared being seen. And so, the story settled into something simple and true. Two lives touched by one moment of kindness. One person changed not by knowing everything, but by being present when it mattered most. A reminder that even quiet connections can echo for a lifetime. Time moved quietly, carrying both challenges and opportunities. He had grown into a rhythm where life felt manageable, where small victories added up to real change. The man who once felt invisible now recognized his own presence in the world. He noticed the details he had ignored for so long, the laughter of children in the streets, the rhythm of birds in the trees, the quiet smiles of strangers passing by. She remained part of his life, though their relationship had evolved. They no longer needed constant reassurance or constant presence to feel connected. Their interactions were steady, rooted in trust, shared understanding, and a deep respect for each other's boundaries. He knew that she had once unknowingly started the transformation in him, but he also knew that his growth belonged to him alone. She had merely reflected what was already possible. He found himself taking risks he never would have considered before. A simple invitation to a community gathering once felt terrifying, but now he accepted opportunities with cautious optimism. Each new experience reminded him that life was full of moments waiting to be noticed and engaged with, rather than avoided out of fear. One morning, he found himself standing before a group of people, speaking about something meaningful from his past. Once, he would have felt paralyzed by the thought of being observed, judged, or misunderstood. But now he realized that the story he carried, his secret, his struggles had shaped him, and sharing it could be powerful, not shameful. His voice, though slightly nervous, carried sincerity and depth. He noticed faces turning toward him, nodding, listening, and he felt a sense of connection he had long denied himself. Afterward, a few people approached him, expressing gratitude for his honesty. Each interaction was small but significant, reaffirming his belief that vulnerability could be strength. He carried these moments back with him, feeling more confident that he could navigate both his inner world and the external one. Meanwhile, their routine continued in simple ways. They met for short walks, shared casual conversations over coffee, or sometimes simply sat together in quiet spaces, noticing the rhythm of the city around them. These moments were unremarkable to outsiders, but profoundly meaningful to them. A testament to the power of consistent human presence. He began writing again, something he had abandoned years before due to fear and doubt. Words came slowly at first, hesitant, but gradually they grew stronger and more fluid. Writing became a mirror, reflecting his growth, his struggles, and his understanding of life. The pages held fragments of his past, present reflections, and hopes for the future. Through writing, he could explore emotions that were difficult to voice aloud. She occasionally read his writings, offering thoughtful observations but never judgment. Her presence remained steady, a reminder that he could be seen and understood without fear. He realized that her influence had extended beyond immediate actions. It had taught him to trust himself, to trust his instincts, and to trust that he could grow even in moments of uncertainty. New challenges arose, as they always do. There were moments when his past threatened to resurface, bringing with it fear and self-doubt. But he had developed tools to cope, strategies learned through patience, reflection, and experience. He could pause, breathe, and respond rather than react. The weight of his secret no longer dictated his every decision. Over time, he began volunteering in small ways, helping others who struggled quietly, much like he once had. A conversation here, a small gesture there, a presence that mirrored what he had once received. Each act was minor in isolation, but cumulatively, they reinforced a sense of purpose, of belonging, and of impact. Through these actions, he discovered a sense of fulfillment that went beyond personal healing. One evening, they attended a local music performance together. He listened intently, noting the emotion in the performer's expressions and the way music could touch people without words. She observed him with a quiet smile, recognizing that he had developed an awareness and appreciation for life that had previously eluded him. He, in turn, felt grateful for the experiences she had introduced him to and the steady support she had provided along the way. As months turned into years, he found a new balance in life. The secret that once isolated him remained a part of his story, but it no longer confined him. Instead, it had become a reference point, a reminder of resilience, growth, and the power of human connection. He felt gratitude for the struggles and the people who helped him navigate them, recognizing that life's challenges could also be opportunities for growth. Their friendship, still central, had evolved into a partnership of mutual respect. They celebrated each other's successes, provided support during challenges, and enjoyed simple, everyday moments together. Laughter, shared reflections, and small adventures became the rhythm of their connection, demonstrating that life's richness often resides in the ordinary rather than the extraordinary. He became more attuned to the people around him. He recognized when someone needed a listening ear or a simple act of kindness. He approached these opportunities with humility and empathy, knowing firsthand how significant even small gestures could be. The lessons he had learned from her quiet presence were now being shared organically with the world around him. One afternoon, while walking through a familiar park, he paused to observe a family laughing near a fountain. A feeling of contentment washed over him. He thought back to the days when he would have avoided such scenes, when the fear of judgment and failure kept him from fully engaging with life. Now, he could witness joy without fear, appreciating the beauty of moments without feeling disconnected. He reflected on his journey, realizing how much he had changed. The man who once hid from the world had become someone capable of embracing life with awareness, compassion, and resilience. He had learned that personal transformation was not about erasing the past, but about integrating it, using it as a foundation for growth. In quiet moments, he often thought of Hertha, person who had unknowingly sparked the transformation. She hadn't sought to fix him, had not demanded explanations or confessions. She simply noticed him, treated him with respect and empathy, and allowed the space for trust and growth to develop naturally. That realization deepened his appreciation for simple acts of human kindness and their lasting impact. As time went on, he began mentoring others in small ways, guiding them with patience and empathy. He shared insights learned from his own experiences, emphasizing the importance of self-compassion, honesty, and persistence. His actions demonstrated that change was possible, even in situations that once seemed hopeless. He also revisited his creative pursuits, exploring new hobbies and interests he had long ignored. Music, art, writing, and community involvement became sources of joy and self-expression. These activities reminded him that life was not solely about survival, but about engagement, creativity, and shared experiences. Through all of this, he maintained an awareness of the power of human connection. He understood that even a brief encounter, a kind word, or a patient presence could have ripple effects that were impossible to measure. The impact of her initial presence in his life became a guiding principle, inspiring him to treat others with the same empathy and attentiveness he had received in moments of reflection. He realized that his story was not about a single event, a dramatic revelation, or an instant transformation. It was about gradual growth, consistent support, and the courage to face life with openness. He understood that resilience was built through experience, patience, and the willingness to engage with the world despite fear. Ultimately, his life had become richer, not because the secret was erased or life became effortless, but because he had developed the tools, perspective, and confidence to navigate it fully. He had become someone who could appreciate the present, plan for the future, and handle challenges with composure. His world had expanded in ways he had once thought impossible. The story did not end with grand gestures or dramatic conclusions. It ended quietly, with a sense of fulfillment, resilience, and hope. It was a life shaped by small, meaningful connections, consistent support, and the courage to face oneself. And at the center of it all remained the understanding that true change often begins with someone simply seeing us, acknowledging us, and choosing to be present without expectation.